How's it going, guys? John, the Basic Expert here, and in today's video, we're going to be reviewing Everyday Heroes, the core rulebook, and the Vault of Rules Compendium Volume 1. And I've been going through these books. They're massive books. The Everyday Heroes book is a 460-page book, and the Vault Rules Compendium Volume 1, which they sent me, Evil Genius Games sent me, is a, let's see, how big is it? It's a 353-page book. I was taking my notes. I try and take notes when I do these sorts of things, and I realized that this review was going to be way too long and way too dense if I went through every single little nitty-gritty thing that I was doing. So I tried to go through and sort of pick out the things that I thought were worth highlighting, worth talking about, and we'll give this game a rating at the end. I think it bears talking about because I haven't done an actual review of a game in a while. I probably should get back to it. I rate games on 3 factors, and then I average the three together to give you a score out of 10. And so each individual thing is rated out of 10, and then we average them together to get the average score out of 10. And the 3 areas that I rate games on are the system itself. How good is the system? Is it fun to play, right? Like that's pretty important. I rate it on clarity. How easy is it to read and understand the game? And then I rate it and how well is it explained? And then I rate it on art, presentation, and layout. I feel like those 3 things are 3 things that are very important for any game to be successful and worth your time. And I rate those again out of 10. We average them together and we get an average score out of 10 altogether for what the game I think is score out of 10. Before we actually dive into the review, one more thing I want to talk about. Actually, 2 more things I want to talk about. First, if you like this kind of content and you want to support my work and my channel, you can do so on Patreon, or on Subscribestar, or right here on YouTube. I have links to all that stuff in the pinned comment below. Make sure you check that out. As well as I'll have links to the Everyday Hero stuff if you're interested in checking it out. Final note before we go into the review and start talking about specifics about the game is I understand that there are some controversial things going on with Evil Genius Games. I'm not privy to what is going on. I have not looked into it myself. And you guys know that I can come in with a hot take sometimes. I purposely do sometimes, but you guys also know, if you've been with this channel for a while, that when I go in with a hot take, I generally try and think about the hot take before I speak about it publicly. Like the mythical underworld, this idea of materialism in games, this idea of rules is written versus rule zero. I generally try and sit and think and plan these things out to at least present my ideas as best as I possibly can, so that they're well researched, they're well argued, and they're expressed as clearly as I possibly can. People still misunderstand me, but that's the way it is. So I try and present my hot takes as best as I possibly can. I have not done any of that research, any of that deep thinking on the situation with Evil Genius Games. I literally don't know much about it at all. So that will not be the focus of this video and will not be talked about in this, because I don't want to come down one way or another and be wrong, make a fool of myself, look like an idiot. That's generally what gets you in trouble online, is when you're a little hasty in the things that you say one way or another. And so it's much better to just keep your mouth shut if you don't know what you're talking about. And in this situation, I don't know what I'm talking about. So again, that will not be the focus of this video. It will just be about the PDFs for Everyday Heroes. All right, with that said, let's talk about the game. So I want to first talk about the rules. I think that's a good place to start. So Everyday Heroes is a game that it's sort of, let's talk about what you can expect as far as what, I'm a proponent of rules express the game world that you're playing in. And this is a game that is very much trying to ground it in reality. You're not playing, as in my buddy Victor's game, Modern Adventurer's Guide to Guns and Gear, as like a dwarf sheriff or an elf in the mafia or something like that, or some sort of goblin mafia boss, right? Instead, in this game, everyone is human, at least in the core rulebook, and you're given all these backgrounds that are very grounded, they're very real. There are things like activist, student, clergy, like you're an actual priest. The art for it is like funnily enough, it's a priest that's an Orthodox priest on a motorcycle. And funny story, my priest actually right? He doesn't ride a motorcycle because he's older, but he rides a scooter and he rides it in his cassock with his helmet on. It's pretty great. But everything is very grounded in these books, in this book, at least in the core rule book, and how it presents the character classes and the backgrounds and professions. And you are given everything in this book, I think, that you need to run the game. You are given rules on how attacks work. You are given rules on cover. You are given rules on actions that you can take in combat that do include things like dashing, clearing a jam in your firearm, all of those sorts of things. Cover, concealment. These things are all in the rules. So you can reference your 2014 books or your 2024 ones if you're interested in that. But generally, I think everything you need is in this book to run this game, and it kind of explains it. So I think that's kind of nice in these core rules. And I think that the rules also express a very like modern sort of grounded feel, in that you're capped at level 10, and the monsters that are presented are all things like security guard, veteran soldier, thief, gangster. Like there all of these enemies and foes that you can potentially encounter in the game are very grounded and real. So again, you're given rules for everything, and you have creatures that sort of present this very grounded world. Now, the Vault Rules Compendium is itself kind of adds on to the bizarre and the strange and the sort of expansion of that, right? So they sent me the Vault of Rules, the Vault Rules Compendium Volume 1, and in that you have more career paths. You have more classes that are, some of them are like billionaire, combat engineer, combat medic. They're things that are a bit more grounded, but they're a little more hyper-focused in a more military setting, or street warrior, strategist, survivalist, gutter rat. These are a little bit more fun but grounded classes that you can get. But then you also have extraordinary classes like the alien gadgeteer, cyber modder, mind doctor, soothsayer, mutant shifter. Like, so you're getting into some of the weird stuff now too, if you want to go a little bit more sci-fi. So the core rules is like very grounded, very like this is the real world, everyone's human. And then the volume 1 rules vault sort of overlays on top of that some more grounded and realistic classes, but then also some other weird stuff as well. I got to plug, again, my buddy's book, Victor Gorchev. If you're into 5e, or if you play OSC, he just recently did his Kickstarter and is in the process of fulfilling it. He's already sent out the physical books, which I should cover on my channel. But Modern Necessities, which is for old school essentials. And he takes a different approach. Again, Victor's approach, I was kind of reticent to review this book at first, because I didn't want to step on Vic's toes, because Vic is my friend. And I believe the stuff that Vic makes is actually really cool. Vic is a huge, big idea guy. You need a setting planned. You need like a really cool idea that you are not going to think of yourself. Vic will think of it for you, because the dude is just like, I don't know how he comes up with these setting ideas and these concepts, because they're pretty dang cool, and they're out there, but they're out there in a good way. And so Vic definitely leans into that with his work, and with his sort of modern take of both 5e and old school essentials, with both the Modern Adventurer's Guide to Guns and Gear and Modern Necessities. So these are like two different things, and I think that if you are an Everyday Heroes fan, you would find Vic's thing very complementary to what you're doing there. If you want to overlay some more fantastical elements, so Volume 1 here of the Vault Rules Compendium adds like some sci-fi elements, but what if you want to add like more fantasy elements, like a modern fantasy? Vic's stuff would work really well for that. And I think because they're both 5e, they would both be very compatible with one another, and would complement each other rather well. I don't necessarily see these two things as competing. I think they're in the same genre, in the same way that like Palladium Fantasy and D&D are in the same genre, but they're the vibe and the goal that they're going for are two different things. And so I think because of that, there's some crossover here. So I would encourage you guys to check that out. So let's talk about some things that I've noticed in this game that sort of interest me, maybe sort of bother me a little bit. One thing I noted was that I don't like the leveling system in Everyday Heroes. I don't like, personally, and this is just my personal take, I don't like abandoning experience points. I think that abandoning experience points is kind of a design mistake, but I get why people do it. I get why it's done in Everyday Heroes. It's because it's trying to go for a more cinematic thing. We're not playing a game where, wealth and gold, and you're not delving into a dungeon and extracting treasure from it. You're playing as modern people. Like the wealth system in this, it's very similar to Call of Cthulhu's, if you're familiar with that, where there's like a wealth rating where, that will determine how much gear and what gear you can purchase and what kind of assets you would occur. To me, it's very, very reminiscent of Call of Cthulhu's monetary system. Sort of like where it's just kind of abstracted into the back so that you as the players can sort of engage with the game and the setting and the investigation that you're doing and not be penny pinching thinking about how to spend your money on that last bullet to shoot Cthulhu in the face. The same is true in Everyday Heroes, and I think it's just because both of these games, Everyday Heroes and Call of Cthulhu, they're trying to do different things, as opposed to like D&D, counting your coin and making sure that deals with encumbrance and getting loot out of the dungeon, which is very important. And so that's a mechanical part of the game. That's why that's there. So that said, I get why these choices are made, but it's the kind of leveling and it's milestone leveling based on GM fiat in a lot of respects. Although it does a decent job explaining it that like a level should be given out when the players accomplish something big. Either they complete a whole adventure or they accomplish something big within the adventure itself. So the example that I sort of took away from it in my mind that I kind of came up with was, let's say they're fighting an evil spy organization. Your group are playing Everyday Heroes. They're fighting an evil spy organization, and the players have just taken out the number one henchman of the main bad guy of the spy organization that they're fighting, and because of that, they're able to get the encrypted key to get to the MacGuffin that will, resolve this adventure. That might be a good point to give them a milestone level, and if they use the key, get to the MacGuffin, beat the bad guy at the spy organization that they're fighting against, then they'd get another level, right? So it kind of explains it like that. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of that mode of leveling though, because it still, even though the players have a carrot in front of them that's dingling them along, it still relies too much on GM fiat. I would prefer, if we're going to do milestone, I prefer kind of like the Adventures in Middle Earth mode of this, where, and this is the original way of milestone being expressed in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, which is assign an XP value to specific tasks and things that the players will do. So, for instance, the players are able to kill or beat the number one henchman of the spy organization and get the encrypted key to the MacGuffin, give them 1,500 or 2,000 experience points to share amongst themselves, right? That is, in my opinion, reasonable and fair. Or, Adventures in Middle Earth did this, where it's like, if the group does this, give them X amount of XP. If an individual character does this, give that individual character X amount of XP. And I like that sort of granularity as far as like milestone leveling. If we're going to do it, I like that sort of granularity that the XP still allows you to do, as opposed to here's a level because you did plot thing. So that's one thing that kind of, as far as the system is concerned, I wasn't really interested in, and I don't think I would use it that way. I guess the good part is that it's based on 5e, so you could easily import in the 5e leveling thresholds and import in actual like XP values for accomplishing things via the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, or something like Adventures in Middle Earth, how their adventures sort of reward players for accomplishing aspects of the campaign or the module that you're running. The other thing that I was sort of interested in or whatnot was the art. The art in this game is the cover is like really cool, and I can tell you exactly how it's made. A lot of the art in this book is photo bashing, which is a technique of taking photo textures, 3D models, kind of putting them together in a collage setting and painting over the top of them until you get a cohesive scene or image. It's sort of like digital collaging. Some people think it's like cheating, but you actually still need to know how to paint in order to do this. And I can tell you that as someone who has used this technique in the past, as for concept art and for illustration for bigger companies like Chaosium or Green Ronin or Mongoose Publishing. I've used this technique before in the past for specific situations. It's just another tool in the toolbox. The problem with the photo bashing technique is sometimes, and I've seen this in my own art, if you don't do a very good job of it, it's very obvious that you're doing that. And I feel like some of the pieces in this look really cool. Some of them look very much like I know that that is just a photo bashed image. That's a photo texture like of there's one of the firemen and that I'll show on the screen here. What to me, and again, this is just, I'm not trying to be mean, but it's just that it looks very clearly like it's a photo of a fireman kind of pasted into the scene, and it's like a light painting over it. I like to do a little bit more painting over the top of my photo textures if I'm incorporating them into my work, but that's just me. And some of the art looks like that, and it generally, like 99% of the time when the art is like that, it looks pretty good. And there's other pieces of art that aren't necessarily bad. I'm not going to say that they're bad. They're just a different style. And so the art aesthetic is just different to me as far as presentation is concerned. And so to me, it's like you have this super hyper realistic photo bashed look, and then you have this very like sort of lighthearted cartoony look. And I guess, you know, they both could work, but I don't know. Something about it just, it doesn't suit me. I would prefer art to be all one or the other, but that's just me. And I understand the limitations as an art director of, you know, you have a limited pool of reliable artists, because us artists, I can tell you as an artist, we can be very unreliable. We can be very hard to work with. And so sometimes you're left with who can get the job done. So keep that in mind, artists that are watching this. Sometimes you can get work because you are on time and you're a pleasant person to work with. Keep that in mind. So I won't dock it too much for that. It's just something I noticed, that the art style seems to like really go in these two, in my opinion, divergent, just my personal opinion, divergent paths. And I would much rather have preferred it one way or the other. That's just my internet critic sort of perspective there, which is, I will say, admittedly kind of nitpicky, because I'll say RPGs don't necessarily need art. Look at Classic Traveler, which is incredible game. And there's very little art in those little 3 books of the original 1977 rules. So, you know, just throwing that out there. It's just something I observed in sort of scrolling through the PDF and looking at the art within it. So let's recap some things here about the game, because I might have missed some things. I have my notes in front of me, but I don't write a script for these. I hate writing scripts. So the game is everything you need in the rules, which I think is great. Everything you need to run an Everyday Heroes game is in the core rules. You have classes, you have the rules for combat, again, such as dashing, disengaging, clearing a jam, cover, suppressive fire. All the rules that you need there's like a 5e version for all of that within this book, within the core rule book. And then you get even more stuff. You get more feats and classes as far as the Vault Rules Compendium Volume 1 that was sent me. And those can really up your game to be a little bit more weird, a little more sci-fi again, with the mutant classes and things like that. So I appreciate that all the rules are there. You don't necessarily need your 2014 handbook, because it's kind of repackaging the 5e rules in a way, in a new thing, in a new way, right? With a very grounded, realistic, modern feel. Things that I did also notice was that resting and saves have not changed. And so to me, I guess it kind of gets into this Hollywood vibe. You can make it make sense, but I've never liked the rest mechanics in 5e. And I would have liked to have seen that changed a little bit more, as the default rules is for short and long rests. But it is what it is. It has death saves too, and the death saves sort of like, if you roll a 20, you automatically are revived and good. If you roll a 1, you get 2 failures, which means you might die, if you understand how death saves work. And then in the middle there, if you succeed or fail, it's 1 success or 1 failure. And if that's your 3rd success, you're up at 1 HP, or you're revived at 1 HP, you're stabilized, or you're dead if it's your 3rd failure. So I think death saves, they're interesting and they're dramatic, but I just have never... I've always had mixed feelings about them. So you can think about those however you want. For me, the death saves aren't as big of a deal as I feel like I would have liked to have seen I would have liked to seen the default rules be a little bit different, but I get that. I think at this point, and this will be a problem for my 5e clone, the default rest rules are just assumed and a given by 5e people. And so if they see those things change, they start rioting. You know, they start burning trash cans. It's summer 2020 all over again because you've changed the length of time. I noticed this in my comment sections when I suggested the gritty realism rule. I got 20 of 5e heads that were like, this is the worst thing I ever heard in my life. And I think it's just because you're illiterate, but it's besides the point. I would have liked to have seen something different, but I have a very specific different taste than what 5e people generally want and seem to claim they want. So I get marketing towards that kind of person. And it's not like the rest. It's not like you can't take gritty realism from the 2014 DMG and import that into everyday heroes. So, you know, there's that. So this is going to be mostly focused on the everyday heroes book, the core book, but we'll include the vault of whatever, the vault of the Vault Rules Compendium. I can't think right now. We'll include the Vault Rules Compendium in this rating. So, because it's, you know, it's a lot of it is very overlapped between the two. So let's talk about the system. I would give the system a 7.5 out of 10. Why? Because it's 5e. I consider 5e to be like a C plus kind of system. And this is just like, it's 5e. You look at this and you're like, this is 5e. I know what I'm getting into. I know the rules. The rules are changed where it makes sense to fit this sort of modern setting, and they're kept the same and very familiar where they need to be familiar and the same. And so because of that, like, I know people hate 5e, but at the end of the day, 5e is a system. It does work. People understand it. It's not the greatest system ever. I'm not giving it an A+, right? This isn't a 10 out of 10 on the system. Because to me, 5e is like, it's like that steady workhorse. It's like that you can have fun with it. It's not totally broken, but it's not like the best system that I've ever played ever in my entire life. It's just a good game that you can use to have good fun. That's the 5e system. And so I would give this game a 7.5 just for that fact. Art and layout, I'm going to give it an 8. I'm going to give it an 8 because there's some pieces of art that look really good, and there's some that just feel out of place to me. And I get that it's because, you know, you hire out, this project was kickstarted, so you hire out a lot of artists, and you're going to get lots of different quality and lots of different styles in. You can look at that as like a diverse, but one thing that I like is I like when I get a book, I like to have like a concise vision, visually even, in the book. And that's one thing, to toot my own horn, but Black Lodge Games has said about my work, and in particular Makuhito, with the Aztec role-playing game that I made, that because I'm one guy making everything, and I did the art, the layout, the writing, everything, it's very singular in vision. It's very uniform in vision. Whether that vision is good or bad, I don't know, but it's uniform, right? And I feel like when you get to these bigger projects like Everyday Heroes, or a lot of these bigger Kickstarters where there's lots more creatives involved on a project, you start to get more chefs in the kitchen, and if you're not careful, you can start to get some disjointed tastes. And I feel like that kind of occurs with the art in this book. Some art pieces are super awesome. I like them. Some are sort of like, I don't really care about that. But the layout itself is good. So I'll give it an 8 because I think the layout is very readable. It looks nice. It's clean. It looks good. It's not like super duper amazing. It's a B, right? It's 80% on the art and layout kind of smushed together in one score. 8 out of 10. As far as clarity and reading the rules, I think this owes some of it going back to 5e, but I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10 because it's easy to understand. It's 5e. Now, you might hate that. So the fact that, but again, I'm not rating it on yours. I'm trying to be as objective as possible here. You might not like 5e, and you might not care that it's very clear and the rules and presented in a very clear way. But I think that's ultimately good. And I think that if you are a 5e person, you're going to have no problem picking this up and playing it. Even if you're not necessarily a 5e person, it's been a while since you played 5e, you'll be able to pick this up and know exactly what's going on. Because, again, 5e is that 7.5 average fun system. And the way it's presented here, it's very clear. You can understand what it is. So very, very easy in that regard, I think, for the game to accomplish that. So with that, so we have system at 7.5, we have art and layout at 8, and we have clarity at 9. That gives us a total score of 8.2 out of 10, which is pretty good. That's a B. I would expect nothing less from, I think, a bigger design company, a bigger design publisher that is using 5e, which, again, you can love or hate 5e, but whether you like it or not, you can't deny that it's popular for a reason. It's easy to understand. It's easy to have fun with it. It's easy to not have fun with it, but it's easy to have fun with it too. You can get rocking and rolling in it very easily. And I think Everyday Heroes would have the same thing. So if you're interested in checking out the Vault Compendium Volume 1, or Everyday Heroes core rulebooks, I'll have links to those below, as well as Victor's stuff. Because again, I think they're both compatible, and I think Vic has a cool perspective that is, at least in the books that were sent me here, there's no direct competition between the two exactly, right? There's some overlap, there's some complementariness to this. So check out Vic's stuff, Modern Adventurer's Guide to Guns and Gear, and his Old School Essentials, Modern Necessities. If you missed the Kickstarter, you can get the PDF, and I think he's working on the print-on-demand version, at least as recording this. He's waiting for some proofs to come in to sort of fix some mistakes that occurred. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. I hope that you found it interesting, enjoyable, and hopefully I covered all the bases that I possibly could to give my opinion on this. There was a lot here. Again, this is like a 400-plus page book and a 300-plus page book that they sent me. So trying to fit that all into like a video that is digestible for you guys to get, like, I had to leave some things out and kind of focus in on what I found most interesting and maybe bothered me the most as well. So I'm sure that I'm too critical by someone's standard and not critical enough by others. I guess that's how I know, if that appears in the comment section, that I was hopefully objective. If people come at me with both accusations, which they very well might. That's going to do it for this video, guys. Again, if you want to support the channel, you can find me on Patreon. You can find me on my Guilded server, or right here on YouTube. You can support via the members section. And thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace out.